because of perceptions at the network level, but I'm okay with that. I would say to them, look, this is a legitimate story, and it's not hard to follow. There's a big learning curve in the beginning where you've got to figure out who's legitimate, what cases make sense, where you got to separate wheat from the chaff. And while 90%, 95% of it is nonsense or honest misidentifications of prosaic phenomena, that remaining core of information is profoundly interesting. And there are ways you can honestly pursue it as a reporter without giving up any of your journalistic standards, to pursue it the same way you do any other story. You follow the paper trail, you interview witnesses, you see if you can corroborate what they're saying, and you tell the story. It's like the journalist's ethical imperative. Get the story, get it right, and tell it no matter who it helps or who it hurts. That would work in this regard. And sometimes I feel awfully lonely pursuing this because there aren't many people in my line of work that are doing it. On the other hand, I do have sort of the area to myself. You know, there's not a lot of competition for it.
Now, the History Channel recently did the Ancient Astronaut series, and that's been regarded as a well-researched, well-documented, and courageous piece of material. It was also their most highly rated show. So do you think that the media is helping, that there's some kind of evolution happening here, where these ideas are becoming more mainstream and being advanced with a larger degree of truth?
I think there's some truth to that there is sort of disclosure happening in incremental levels going around the media, going around science, and going around the government. And it is so common on the History Channel and elsewhere that it's almost a given. There's so much of this stuff. I sometimes worry about UFO overload, that maybe we're getting too much, so much that people don't think about it. There are so many stories about aliens and ETs and UFOs and flying saucers that and they're presented by the History Channel, and they're done very well. But the fact is that it's always going to be viewed as entertainment. Until it's on 60 Minutes, until it's on the front page of the New York Times, it's not news. It's still entertainment. And I just don't see it having the same kind of impact. Well, I can address this, is that, you know, in a lot of ways, the Russian experience is similar to our own. Their government told them the same thing. There's nothing to this. In fact, they blame it on us. We blamed a lot of UFO sightings on the Russians. It must be Russian rockets, and the Russians blamed it on us. Or they blamed it as a plot of American capitalism to interfere with fundamental views of Russian citizens for a long period of time during the Cold War. And the Russians discouraged their own scientists, in public anyway, from discussing it, from studying it, whereas behind the scenes, those same officials who were saying, keep your mouth shut, don't talk about this, were asking these scientists to study things like Roswell, to study UFO sightings, and to find out what was going on. And the Russian government reached the same conclusion ours did. Something really is flying around up there. It's from somewhere else. It can fly circles around everything that we have. In one instance that I personally uncovered and investigated, UFOs hovered over a Russian ICBM base in 1982 and somehow entered the launch control codes in these missiles. The missiles were enabled. They were ready to go. And then the UFO, which had been flying around over the base for 4 hours, went poof, disappeared. The control panel went back to normal. The Russian colonel who came in to investigate this said they couldn't find anything that caused it. It had never happened before. It never happened since, but they took it very seriously. And they took it as a message from the UFOs that this might be your most important weapon system, but it doesn't impress us. The Russians have had an ongoing interest in UFOs. They have studied it at the highest levels of their government. They had the biggest UFO study in history, 10-year long. Every unit in the vast Soviet military empire was required to fully investigate and report anything anomalous, ball of light, UFO, and send it all to this one central location. And we found the guy and had the first interview with the guy who was in charge of it. They don't know what UFOs are either. They just know something is going on that they can't explain.
So George, with the advent of like YouTube and all of the different ways to get information out, everybody's got a video camera, everybody could be a producer, and millions of people are actually watching these videos. How does that change the landscape in relationship to the mainstream media and the dissemination of information?
Well, there's good and bad in that everybody can now be their own video producer. Everyone who's got a computer is suddenly a researcher. Everyone is a ufologist who wants to call himself a ufologist. With the technology that's available, Photoshop abilities, anyone can manufacture their own UFO video. And it complicates the situation because you can never tell what's real and what isn't. In addition, while I encourage citizen journalism and for people to write their own blogs and get active and write stuff and cover things, there's still no substitute for experience. You got to have actual journalists working on some of this stuff as well. I don't see any likelihood that mainstream journalists, network level journalists, are going to be taking this more seriously. I am encouraged that independent producers, your team, for example, some of the stuff that I've done independently of my employer, that takes place. You could hope that those kind of productions, if they're done well, would encourage somebody like 60 Minutes or a Nightline or 48 Hours to dig into this topic. It hasn't happened yet, but it still could.
Do you have a sense that academia is totally ignoring a subject that should be on the front burner?
Absolutely, they're ignoring it. And I can give you examples of it. This past spring semester, I was asked to teach a class at UNLV about UFOs and conspiracies and journalism, how you would approach these topics as a journalist and teach it to future journalists. UNLV initially said, yeah, great, especially since I had a sponsor who was going to pay for my work and my time and bring guests and everything in.
Wow.
And then they realized, wait a second, this is about UFOs here. This guy's going to be talking about Roswell and flying saucers and cover-ups. You know, let's just think about it here. We'll okay the class, but we want you to make sure you have that you address other things other than conspiracies, that you bring in skeptics who don't believe any of this is true, which I don't mind having balance and things like that. I did worry that their reticence to accept the class as I described it was the beginning of the end, and it ended up being the end as well, because the class didn't happen. Academia, you would think on a university campus of all places, you could talk about anything. That's what it's there for. Free thought, free expression, explore ideas, challenge conventional paradigms. That's what it's for. And it doesn't exist, not on this topic. I remember when I was producing this documentary, I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I went to Vanderbilt University to interview this astronomer, prominent guy, well-respected, PhD. I asked him about UFOs. Well, that UFO stuff, there's nothing to it. There's no evidence. I said, well, how much have you read about it? He says, I've read everything that's appeared in the academic press. I'll tell you, it'd take you about 5 minutes to read everything that's been in the academic press. You can't publish an article about UFOs. I know PhD guys, Nobel Prize quality guys who have written articles that are rejected just because of the subject matter. Dr. Brian O'Leary was at Cornell with Carl Sagan. He was accepted for the astronaut program. He's a brilliant man.
Sure.
He wants to talk about this stuff, and it's completely discouraged. He can't get an article published in a scientific journal because they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to deal with it, and it's bankrupt. It's ridiculous. It's shameful is what it is.
No, I've interviewed Dr. O'Leary, and he's in a couple of my
Yeah, he's a good guy.
George, I
too.
just really want to thank you for sitting with us for a while
Sure.
and really covering these topics. I know a lot of people are interested in what
Thanks.
you have to say. Thank
Sure.
you.
Right.